There are people who believe that the worth of a human being is a function of their title, who move through the world with the quiet, absolute conviction that the hierarchy they occupy in their professional life is also the hierarchy of actual human value, that the person at the top of the org chart is simply worth more than the person at the bottom, in the same way that a senior partner is worth more than an associate, and a corner office is worth more than a cubicle. These people exist in every field and every city and every kind of room. They are not always cruel. They are not always conscious of what they are doing. But they communicate the belief in the small and accumulated ways that beliefs get communicated, in the way they speak to certain people and past other people and about still others, and the people they speak past always know. The people who have been looked through by someone like that always know. This is a story about one of those moments. About a surgeon and a janitor and a game show stage, and the specific thing that happens when a man who has been looked through his entire professional life stands beside a man who has been looking through people his entire professional life, and both of them are in front of Steve Harvey, who has been watching how people treat each other for 30 years, and who, when the moment arrived, said exactly the thing that needed to be said with exactly the directness it required. Hit that like button and subscribe right now before we go any further, because stories about dignity and the people who defend it are what this channel is built on, and we bring one every single week. Now let us talk about what happened. The Reyes family from San Antonio, Texas arrived at the Family Feud studio in the summer of 2024 with the easy, comfortable warmth of a family that has been happy together for a long time and knows it. The team captain was 51-year-old Roberto Reyes, who had been a janitor at the same hospital in San Antonio for 22 years. He was a man who had spent 2 decades becoming extraordinarily good at something that the people who benefited from it every day almost never noticed, which is the nature of work done so well that its results read as simply the natural condition of things, rather than as the product of skill and effort and care. He knew the hospital the way only someone who has cleaned every square foot of it for 22 years can know it. The specific problem that the second-floor East Corridor presented in winter. The drainage issue in Operating Room 3 that had never been fully resolved, and that required a particular approach. The supply closet arrangement that he had redesigned 4 years ago in a way that had reduced setup time for his team by 20 minutes per shift. He managed a team of 11 people. He had trained every one of them. 3 of them had been promoted out of his department into facilities management roles at the hospital, and had told him, when they left, that he had taught them more about attention and thoroughness and professional pride than anyone else they had worked for. His wife Alina, 49, worked as a school cafeteria supervisor and had the specific, large-hearted energy of someone who has spent her career feeding other people's children, and who has never once considered this beneath her, because she has always understood, with the clarity of a person who has thought carefully about what actually matters, that feeding a child is one of the most important things a person can do with their working hours. Their son Miguel, 23, was in his final year of a nursing program, a fact that made Roberto's eyes do something specific when he talked about it. The look of a man watching the next generation step into a world that had not always been easy for him to navigate, and doing it with less friction than he had faced, which is the whole point. Their daughter Rosa, 20, was in her second year of college studying education, with her mother's warmth and her father's thoroughness, and the specific combination of patience and precision that makes a good teacher. And the 5th team member was Roberto's brother Carlos, 46, who ran a small plumbing business, and who had the quick, practical intelligence of someone who solves problems for a living, and who has learned that the most elegant solution is almost always the simplest one. They had applied to Family Feud because Rosa had submitted the application as a Father's Day gift, which Roberto had received with the specific mix of surprise and delight that comes when a child knows you well enough to give you the thing you did not know you wanted. He had watched Family Feud for as long as Rosa could remember. He had opinions about strategy. He had, in the 22 years of overnight shifts and long weekends at the hospital, watched a great many episodes with the focused appreciation of someone who finds in the show a specific kind of pleasure. The pleasure of watching ordinary people be extraordinary for an hour, of watching families compete with each other in the ways that families compete, of watching the particular human intelligence that comes not from credentials, but from a lifetime of paying attention to other people and understanding what they think and want and fear. The competing family that day was the Whitfield family from Nashville, Tennessee. The team captain was 48-year-old Dr. Harrison Whitfield, a cardiothoracic surgeon who had done his training at Vanderbilt, and who had, over 20 years of surgical practice, developed the particular professional bearing of someone who spends his working days making decisions that other people's lives depend on, and who has perhaps allowed that bearing to extend somewhat beyond the operating room into the rest of his life. He was not, in the ordinary meaning of that word, a bad person. He had saved lives, a significant number of them. He was technically gifted in a way that required years of training and a particular kind of steady, precise intelligence, and he was entirely aware of this and communicated the awareness in the way he moved through spaces and addressed people and positioned himself relative to the other people in any room he occupied. His family, his wife Catherine, their 2 adult children Brent and Ashley, and his brother-in-law Tom, were pleasant and competitive and clearly excited to be there, though they moved in a slightly different orbit than their team captain, the orbit of people who have spent a long time beside someone who takes up a great deal of gravitational space and have learned to adjust accordingly. The pregame introductions were where the first note of discord was played, though it was played quietly enough that most of the room did not catch it. Steve Harvey had moved through both families with his customary warmth, drawing out personalities and details with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing this for 30 years, and who understands that the pregame is where you find the human material that makes the game worth watching. He had spent time with Roberto, had asked about the 22 years, about the team of 11, about Miguel in nursing school, about Rosa studying education. He had listened with the genuine attention of someone who finds people interesting regardless of what they do for a living, and Roberto had talked about his work with the unpretentious directness of a man who has never been embarrassed by his profession, because he has never had a reason to be. He had said at one point that he took pride in his work because the people who came to that hospital were scared and sick, and the least he could do was make sure the space they were in was clean and orderly and as dignified as possible, and that he thought about it that way every morning when he started his shift. Steve Harvey had received this with the quiet nod of a man who recognizes something he respects. Then Steve had moved to the Whitfield family. He had asked Harrison about his work in the same warm, interested way he asked everyone about their work. Harrison had talked about surgery with the fluency of someone who has explained it at dinner parties many times and who has a polished version of the explanation that hits all the impressive beats efficiently. He had been charming in the calculated way of someone who is good at being charming when it serves a purpose. And then Steve had made a natural conversational bridge, had said something about how the 2 team captains were both connected to hospitals, one on one side of it and one on the other. He had said it warmly as a point of connection, a way of linking the 2 families before the game began. Harrison Whitfield smiled. He said yes, that was one way to put it. He said that he supposed you could say they were both in the hospital business, with the specific, just perceptible quality of someone making a distinction that they consider obvious, and that they believe the room will understand and appreciate. He looked at Roberto across the stage with the look of a man assessing something and finding it smaller than himself. Then he said, not loudly, not with hostility, but with the casual certainty of someone stating what they believe to be a simple fact that requires no defense, that he supposed they weren't quite in the same league. Roberto heard it. He received it with the expression of a man who has been hearing versions of this his entire professional life, who has spent 22 years in a building full of people with credentials and titles and the specific authority those credentials and titles confer, and who has spent 22 years developing a relationship with the way that authority sometimes understands itself relative to people like him. He looked at Steve Harvey. He did not say anything. He breathed. He had practiced receiving this kind of thing. He was good at it. He had never stopped finding it exactly as wrong as it was the first time. Elena, beside Roberto, went still in the way of a woman who has watched her husband absorb this kind of thing across 22 years and who has never gotten used to it and who is waiting for whatever comes next. Steve Harvey had heard it. He had heard it in the specific way he hears things that require a response, not processed through the filter of what the camera might be doing, or what the production schedule required, or how the moment fit into the running time of the episode, but heard directly, registered accurately, and addressed with the full, unmediated attention of a man who has made a decision. He turned to face Harrison Whitfield. He was not smiling in the warm, professional way. He was doing the other thing, the thing his face does when the warmth has been set aside, and what is left is the direct, unhurried, entirely certain attention of someone who has something to say and is going to say all of it. "I want to stop for a second," Steve said. Because something was just said that I heard, and I'm going to respond to it, not to embarrass anybody, to say something I think is true and that I think this room needs to hear." He turned to Roberto first. He looked at him directly, at Roberto Reyes, who was standing with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that stillness is available to him even when things are not still, and who was using it now. Steve said, "I want to ask you something. In 22 years at that hospital, have you ever left a patient in a dirty room?" Roberto said, "No." "Have you ever left an operating room in a condition that put a patient at risk?" Roberto said, "Never." "Have you ever called in sick when you were scheduled and just decided somebody else could handle it?" Roberto said, "I have a record, 22 years, you can check it." Steve Harvey turned to the audience. He let the audience sit with that for a moment. Then he turned back to the stage, to both families, to both men, and he said the thing that he had been building toward, that he had known he was going to say from the moment the words "not in the same league" had reached him. "I want to tell you something about that man," he said, indicating Roberto. "He goes to a building every day where people are scared, where people are the most vulnerable they have ever been in their lives, and he makes sure that building is clean. He makes sure the room where a patient wakes up from surgery is a room with some dignity in it. He makes sure the supplies are where they need to be so that the people whose job it is to help those patients can find what they need and do what they're supposed to do. He does this every day. He has done it for 22 years. He manages 11 people. He trained every one of them. 3 of them got promoted because of him." He paused. "That is not small work. There is no such thing as small work when it is done with that level of care and that level of commitment. There is only work that gets noticed and work that doesn't. And the work that doesn't get noticed," he looked at Harrison Whitfield now, directly and without any hostility, but also without any softening, "is often the work that makes it possible for the work that does get noticed to happen at all." Harrison Whitfield said nothing. His wife Catherine was looking at the floor. His brother-in-law Tom was looking at Roberto with the expression of a man who is revising an opinion in real time. His daughter Ashley was watching Steve Harvey with the focused attention of a young woman who is listening to something she wants to remember. Steve continued, "I've been hosting this show for a long time," he said. "I have had every kind of person come through here. Every profession, every background, every income level, every education. And the one thing I have learned, the one thing is that the most impressive people I have ever met on this stage are not always the ones with the most impressive titles. The most impressive people are the ones who go to work every day and give everything they have to the thing they do, regardless of who is watching or who is going to thank them for it or whether anybody in the building knows their name." He looked at Roberto. "I know your name, Roberto Reyes, 22 years, 11 people, never left a dirty room." He said it the way you engrave something. Then he looked at Harrison Whitfield and said in the same direct, unhurried voice, "Same league. They are in the same league." "I want that clear." Harrison Whitfield looked at Roberto across the stage. Something moved in his expression, not the dramatic collapse of a man confronted, not a performed moment of realization, but something smaller and truer than that. The specific, private expression of someone who has just been shown something they already knew at some level and had decided not to look at directly. He said, not performing it, just saying it to Roberto across the stage. "That was wrong of me to say." "I apologize." Roberto received it. He nodded once. He looked at Steve Harvey. He said, "Can we play now?" Steve Harvey, who had said everything he came to say and who recognized in Roberto's 4 words the same elegant resolution he had recognized in several of the finest people who had ever stood on his stage, smiled the broad, genuine smile of a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be. He said, "We can play now." What followed was a game that the studio audience later described, in the comment sections and social media posts that tracked the episode's spread, as one of the most purely enjoyable they had ever watched. Not because of drama, the drama was done, but because Roberto Reyes, freed from the weight of the moment before it, and playing with the full, released energy of a man who has just heard someone say out loud the thing he had always known about himself and wanted a room to hear. Roberto Reyes was extraordinary at Family Feud. He had been right about himself for 30 years. He did understand how people thought. 22 years of working alongside nurses and technicians and orderlies and residents and patients' families and cleaning staff from a dozen different backgrounds had given him an unusually comprehensive, unusually accurate model of how 100 different kinds of people answered the same question. He gave answers that hit with the confident ease of someone who is not surprised that he is right. He gave answers fast. He celebrated each one with a physical generosity, a raised fist, an arm around Alina, a look at Rosa that said, "Do you see this?" That the audience responded to the same way. Alina was sharp and fast, with the instincts of someone who has spent decades organizing large numbers of children's meals, and who has consequently developed excellent spatial and logistical thinking that translated, unexpectedly and completely, into Family Feud answers. Miguel was good, the nursing student's training in reading people and situations under pressure giving him an advantage he had not known he had until the buzzer was in front of him. Rosa was, as her parents had always known, exceptional, creative, and quick, and exactly right in the specific way of people who are going to be excellent teachers, who have the gift of understanding the question behind the question and giving the answer that is true on both levels simultaneously. Carlos solved problems the way he always solved problems, cleanly, without excess, exactly as required. The Whitfield family played well too. Harrison was technically sharp in the specific way of someone whose entire career had been built on precision. Catherine was fast. Ashley, the daughter who had been listening carefully to everything Steve Harvey said, played with a focused warmth that was noticeably different from the register her father had walked in with, as if she had made some small internal adjustment during the break and was now operating on a slightly different frequency. They were a good game show family. They had simply arrived at a stage that had shown them something they had not expected to be shown, and they were playing in the light of that. The Reyes family won the main game. They went to fast money with Miguel going first, who scored 109 points with the steady, careful accuracy of a young man in his final year of nursing school who had learned to do difficult things under pressure, and who was applying that capacity now. Roberto went second. He stood at the fast money podium the way he stood in the hospital corridors after a long overnight shift, with the settled, durable calm of someone who knows his body and his work and what he is capable of and is not frightened by any room he is standing in. Steve Harvey looked at him and said, with the warm simplicity of someone stating the obvious, "You've been waiting for this your whole life." Roberto smiled. He said, "My daughter put us here, I'm not going to waste it." Steve Harvey looked at the audience one more time. Then he looked at Roberto. He hit the button. Roberto Reyes answered 5 Family Feud survey questions in 20 seconds with 4 number 1 responses and 1 number 2. His final answer, the 5th question, the one that arrived in the last 5 seconds, was the number 1 answer on the board by 17 responses, which the production team confirmed was the largest single answer margin in the show's recent history. The Reyes family's combined fast money total was 281 points. They had won $20,000. The audience gave them the kind of response that has nothing to do with game show mechanics and everything to do with a room full of people who have been on a journey together and have arrived somewhere that feels right. Roberto stood at the podium and looked at the number on the board, and then turned around and looked at his family, and then did not do any of the things that people do when they are performing a reaction. He simply stood there for a moment, in the specific quiet of a man letting something real be real, and then Alina was there, and Rosa was there, and Miguel was there, and Carlos was there, and they were all there together in the way that families are together when something has happened that they are going to be telling for the rest of their lives. Steve Harvey brought the check and handed it to Roberto and said, 22 years, never left a dirty room. Now you can add this to the record. Roberto held the check. He looked at it, he said, "My daughter did this," Steve Harvey said. "Your daughter opened the door, you walked through it the way you walk through everything, with everything you had." Roberto looked at Rosa, who was crying in the specific, uncomplicated way of a young woman who has given her father a gift that turned out to be larger than she knew she was giving. He said to her across the small distance of the stage, "Thank you, Mija." Rosa said, between the crying and the laughing that happens when those two things are happening at the same time, "Happy Father's Day, Pappy." The episode aired 5 weeks later. The clip of Steve's response, the list of Roberto's record, the phrase "same league said" in the specific register of a man engraving it into something permanent, the direct and unhurried address to Harrison Whitfield, spread through labor communities and working-class networks, and the broader conversation that exists in every era about who counts and who doesn't and who gets to decide. Janitors shared it. Cafeteria workers shared it. Security guards, maintenance technicians, hospital orderlies, delivery drivers, sanitation workers shared it with the specific, personal urgency of people seeing something reflected that they have been living for years without seeing reflected. The comment sections were extensive and specific, and in the way of things that touch something real, largely did not require moderation because people were not fighting about it. They were adding to it, building on it, layering their own versions of the thing Roberto's story had named. Nurses and doctors and surgeons who had been in hospitals their entire careers shared it too. many of them writing about the specific truth of what Steve Harvey had said, that the work nobody notices is often the work that makes the noticed work possible. Several wrote with specificity about what a clean operating room actually meant in terms of patient outcomes, about infection rates and sterile fields, and the way a hospital that is maintained with Roberto's level of care produces different results than one that isn't, and about the fact that this truth was known by everyone in clinical practice, but was almost never communicated in the language of equal value. The clip communicated it in that language. The clip was shared in medical schools and nursing programs and hospital administration meetings as a demonstration of something that had been written in textbooks, but had not been said out loud quite this clearly, quite this publicly, quite this simply. Harrison Whitfield did not make a public statement. His daughter Ashley, who had been watching Steve Harvey with that focused, remembering attention throughout the exchange, posted a brief reflection on a personal social media account that she shared privately with her family. She wrote that she had spent the car ride home from the taping thinking about all the people in her father's hospital whose names he did not know. She wrote that she had decided she was going to learn them. She wrote that this was a small thing and that she was aware it was a small thing and that she was going to do it anyway because small things done consistently were not actually small. Her father, she said later in a conversation she shared only with her mother, had read what she wrote and had not said anything for a long time. Then he had said that she was right. She said that was the most useful thing he had said to her in years, and that she hoped he meant it and that she thought he might. Time was the only way to know. Roberto went back to San Antonio and back to the hospital and back to his 11 people and back to the corridors he knew better than anyone else in the building. He told his team about the episode in the brief morning meeting he held every day before shifts began. He told them what Steve Harvey had said. He told them that someone with a large platform had said out loud, in front of a lot of people, that the work they did mattered, and that the people who did work like theirs were in the same league as anyone in any building, with any title, in any corner office. He said he wanted them to know that because he believed it had always been true, and because having it said publicly did not make it more true, but it did make it louder, and sometimes louder was what was needed. His 11 people received this in the various ways that people receive things, some with visible emotion, some with the quiet nod of people who have been waiting for this particular thing to be said, one with a joke that broke the tension in exactly the right way, which was entirely appropriate because that was what that person always did, and Roberto had always loved that about him. Then they went to work. They went to the corridors and the rooms and the operating suites and the supply closets, and they did the thing they did every day, with the same thoroughness and the same care and the same professional pride that had produced over 22 years, a record that Roberto had said could be checked, and that he knew would withstand any checking. The television clip had been watched by millions of people. The hospital had been cleaned by the same standard it was always cleaned by, because that standard had never depended on who was watching. Miguel finished his nursing program in December. Roberto and Alina attended the pinning ceremony, the ceremony where new nurses receive the pin that marks them as members of their profession, with the specific, enormous, carefully managed pride of parents watching a child walk into a room they worked to open. Roberto wore the same jacket he wore to church. He kept his hands in his pockets during the ceremony because he did not trust his hands to be visible during it. When Miguel came off the stage with the pin on his chest, Roberto hugged him in the particular way of a man who has been keeping his emotions in his pockets and has decided that they are allowed out now, briefly, fully, without apology. Miguel, 23 years old and a registered nurse, held his father and said something into his shoulder that nobody else heard. Roberto said something back that nobody else heard. They stood there for a moment. Alina took a photograph. Rosa used her Father's Day gift to teach her father something she already knew about him and that the rest of the world was still learning. She put them on television and they showed up and they played and they won. Happy Father's Day, Pappy. That was the whole plan. That is what it turned out to mean. The work that nobody notices is the work that makes everything else possible. That is not a complicated idea. It has been true in every hospital and every school and every building in every city in this country since before anyone now alive was born. The only question is whether it gets said out loud. On a game show stage in the summer of 2024, in front of a studio audience and a microphone and everything that followed, it got said out loud. By a man who sees people for who they are and who decided without hesitation that the league Roberto Reyes was in was the one that mattered and that the room was going to know it. Same league. They are in the same league. That is what Steve Harvey said. Roberto Reyes had always known it. Now the record reflects it. You can check it. If this story reached you, if it made you think about the people in your life whose work holds everything up and who rarely hear it named, tell them. Today, not eventually. Today. Leave a comment below and tell us who you are thinking of right now, because this community pays attention to each other, and your voice here is part of what makes this space worth coming back to. And if you are not already here with us, subscribe right now, because every single week we come back with stories exactly like this one. Stories about people whose work makes the world run and who deserve to be seen running it. Stories about the moments when someone says out loud what the room needed to hear. And stories about the same league, the one that includes everyone who shows up every day and gives everything they have, regardless of who is watching. We will see you in the next one.